So today we're joined by James Uren, a filmmaker and technical director who has spent over 15 years blending storytelling with cutting-edge technology. With an engineering background from Cambridge University, he started in high-end digital acquisition, Codex Digital, later winning awards for his work in 3D filmmaking and science documentaries, including recognition at BAFTA, now specialising in virtual production as a technical director at Moses. James is deep into the utilisation of technology for storytelling, the perfect guest to explore why Unreal. Let's dive in. So first of all, James, tell us a little bit about your background. I mean, I touched on a few points, but yeah, tell us in 3-5 minutes who you are, where you're from, what's your background, and how you ended up doing sort of the magic that you do now.
Sure. Yeah. Well, so I've always been sort of massively into filmmaking and content creation, but I've got a very sort of technical background, as you said, engineering, kind of classically trained engineer, if you like. That I managed to sort of bring those things together in my career by working on the technical side of the film and television industry. And that's kind of, it tends to be that I'm working on the sort of latest technology. So back, it was quite a long time ago, but there was a big revolution happened in digital cinema, which was moving to digital acquisition with digital film cameras. So that was the sort of first technical journey that I went on, from moving from analog film to digital film and helping people understand the complexities of that change, really, because there was no question it was going to change, but there was, a wide range of people across the craft part of the industry that, need to understand and appreciate those technology changes and what they mean for their craft. And so that was kind of the first bit, really. And then the next big sort of technical wave that I surfed was 3D stereoscopic. So this is the kind of 3D with the glasses, like Avatar, where you go to the cinema, you put on the 3D specs, and you get this illusion of 3D in the screen. I did a lot of work on that for a number of years, did a lot of sort of technical work, did a bunch of creative projects, some of them you mentioned. I was involved at various levels of that process. And that sort of got me into a lot of visual effects as well, and learned a lot about visual effects pipelines and things through that process. And then, 3D sort of, was gone as quickly as it arrived, really. And so I was kind of left a little bit like, oh, well, what have I wasted my last 5 years on? But actually, I'd kind of built up sort of quite a big sort of network of both technical and creative and visual effects stuff. I'd done quite a bit of teaching and training in that area as well. We ran some big conferences and training courses and stuff. And I'd also worked with a company called Moses, who's the company that I'm now with as their technical director. During that sort of period, I met with Moses and started to work with them on some certain projects. And that really exposed me to something that we've now come to know as virtual production. And really, that's the sort of the next wave on which I sit, really. Moses is a manufacturer. We make image robotics, so robots that you put your camera on. We make virtual production tools, so software tools, and we make camera tracking systems that tell us where the camera is very precisely in the studio, which is one of the critical things you need to do virtual production. So I'm sure we're going to get on to sort of what is virtual production. So I'll hold that and I'll just sort of finish off the sort of introduction. Now I'm the technical director of Moses. I'm responsible for all of our R&D in the virtual production toolkit area. I spend something between 2 and 6 weeks a year on set in various roles and capacities, mostly in a sort of consultant or on the sort of technical side, but interfacing very much with the creative teams. So depending on the production, I might be a head of department or a virtual production supervisor, or I might be working with the visual effects team as part of, and working alongside the visual effects supervisor. Yeah, and what this does, the nice thing about this is it gives me a sense of what's required from the technology. So by being on the set, for that sort of portion of my life, my working life, I'm actually getting a lot of exposure to the requirements that the craft practitioners have. And then I can directly feed that into the tools we build, both software and hardware tools we build.
That's amazing. Yeah. I love the term virtual robotics. I've not heard that before.
There we go.
It's really clear.
Rory, so here's a question for you. In as few words as possible, explain in your own words what virtual production actually is.
Okay, no, I've got this one. I've got this one nailed, because you're not the first person to ask me. The simplest explanation, and it's 3 words. It's real-time visual effects, VFX. If I say VFX, it's 1 word. Real-time VFX. So, in order to understand what we mean by that, you have to. And now this is where I did it in 3 words, but now I have to sort of unpack that a little bit. Sorry. So, if you think about what we might call traditional visual effects is, it's filming something in a studio normally, or on a stage, and then later adding effects to that with a computer, right? So it's creating, often very complex computer-generated graphics and combining them with what you film, which we call compositing. So compositing, let's say it's Sandra Bullock in a spacesuit, and we're going to put in the spaceship behind. That would be a traditional, visual effects process. Now, with what virtual production does is it says, well, we're going to kind of turn that on its head, and we're going to do the visual effects in real time, on the day, on the stage, in the camera. Now, where this starts to get a bit tricky is that it's not actually necessarily always about LED walls. There are lots of ways that we can create real-time visual effects. And in fact, people have been doing this for a very long time. We can go right back to Hitchcock's Psycho, the opening scene where she's driving and we're seeing the road behind. That's a technique that's become known as back projection. And obviously Hitchcock has hung a camera off the back of a truck and drove it along the road and filmed the back plate. And then he's reprojecting that and filming again with a car in a studio with the actor inside and probably some grips moving the car a bit. So that is virtual production. That is creating a real-time visual effect. And that's distinct from what you might call a special effect, which is where you explode something or create a blood splatter on the set, which is more of a physical thing. This is actually a visual effect that we're creating in the camera. Equally, in the television land, virtual production has been around for a while as well. So we can think about weather presenters stood in front of blue screen backgrounds where the map is placed behind them. That is a real-time visual effect as well. Now, shall I keep?
Yeah, no,
keep going. Absolutely, keep going.
Absolutely.
So what's happened in the last kind of, probably around about 10 years, I would say, is that, well, two things have happened in parallel. One is that the big limitation of those 2 techniques that I described there, so the back projection in Psycho and the weather presenter on telly, the big limitation of that is that if I move the camera, the illusion is broken. So if I take the camera on the bonnet of the car in the stage and I track across the bonnet, then it's going to become very obvious that the perspective is not matching in the road behind, and it's going to cue the audience that it's a 2D projection.
Suspension of disbelief shattered.
Exactly, right. Now, the magic is gone, visual effect is broken, we don't believe it anymore. You can move it a bit, you can move the camera a little bit and probably get away with it. But if you did a really quite, significant move, it will become clear that that it's not a 3D environment behind you. And the same is true of the weather map, because that map is being effectively kind of photoshopped in. You could think of it like that behind them. The blue is there purely so that we can cut them out easily and then overlay them on top of a still of the UK, for example. If I moved the camera, then the image of the UK would kind of move with the person, and it would look like they were sliding around in front of it. It wouldn't work at all. So this is where camera tracking comes in. This is where MOSIS core technology, Star Tracker Max, it's one of the best tracking systems you can buy, and it is designed to give you the position of the camera so that you can change the background behind the subject. Now, in traditional visual effects, the way that's done is in post-production, I can reconstruct where the camera was. I can do that by tracking the environment or putting these little markers. You might have seen in behind the scenes footage of, people put these like blue crosses on the green screen, and those can then be tracked in order to reconstruct where the camera was in post. But of course, for real-time visual effects, we need to know where the camera is right now,
In real
immediately.
time. Yeah.
So that we can render the right background. And the same is true whether you're replacing the background with green screen or whether you're creating the correct perspective behind a subject in an LED volume.
Cool. Is that clear? That makes sense.
That makes total sense to me.
Yeah. No, totally. So my next question is going to be
just doing it with my fingers, like moving the camera, and
that's it. You think about
the world moves at the same time.
The camera moves, then it would create the perspective, wouldn't it? Another way of thinking about it, if you think of a straight road behind that car, imagine a straight road behind me here.
Mm-hmm.
Then the vanishing point of that road would be there, right? But if I then move the camera, I need the vanishing point to move, to match. I need it to swing round, I need the road to swing, the perspective in the road to change, so that it would actually point off to the left as the camera moves to the right. And that would cheat the illusion. It would keep the illusion that the perspective is correct behind the.
When was the aha moment when you first can you remember back that long? Was it a long time ago, or is it sort of recent?
I think so. I saw this probably. We did a movie quite a long time ago called Immortals, where we provided a very low quality previs, on-set pre-visualization, which is also now called simulcam. People call it simulcam. This means I'm still going to do traditional visual effects, but I want to have a rough visual effect behind me. So I want to replace the green screen live, like I would do with the weather presenter. But I want to see that in such a way that it looks pretty like the end visual effect is going to be, and that's going to improve the performance of my and the blocking of my characters. It's going to kind of tighten the creative loop between the actor and the director, so that because they're going to know what it's going to be like. The director's going to know that that's not going to work because they were looking over there and at this point, and they can picture that a lot easier. It's going to help lighting and camera because they can frame things and light things according to the scene, as it will be in the final visual effect. And we did a very early crude version of that using our own custom system. We weren't using Unreal or anything at this point. And this is, sort of, I don't know, getting on for 15, no, maybe not quite that long, 10 years ago or something like that. And I should have checked IMDb, shouldn't I, before I came on, when it was.
That's fine.
But yeah, it was something like that. And we had a crude, blocks, basically. So there was some pillars or whatever, and we would just put a big cylinder there. That's a pillar. And then the director knew that they could, reveal the camera off of that pillar, for example. They would look at how vaguely that would look when it was done later in traditional visual effects land. At the same time, Unreal Engine is creating better and better quality graphics. And that's really, you asked about the aha moment. That was it, really, basically realizing that we could use Unreal to do this, this simulcam process. And that aha moment sort of changed things quite a lot in my career and life, really, because Moses decided to set up an office up here in Cambridge where I live, where we could focus on that, get some developers, software developers, build a little team. That team, I'm sat in that office now, and we're now up to sort of 15 developers up here building out these. And that was really it. So starting to use Unreal in its native form to do, and building software tools that help people to use Unreal natively. I should explain what Unreal is.
We'll come back to that.
Okay,
we're going to come back. I'm going to ask you one more question, which was,
please do. Yeah,
really, what's the biggest misconception that you hear most of the time that people have about virtual production?
Well, I think it's really because Mandalorian obviously kind of kicked off this whole new type of virtual production with LED walls. I think the biggest misconception is that virtual production didn't exist before that, and really people, I think, incorrectly think of virtual production as a technology, as in it's about putting the perspective into an LED wall. Whereas actually virtual production is not a technology, it's a technique. And it's about doing your visual effects in pre-production, right? So normally visual effects happens way down the line, right? But if I want to film either a really good simulcam green screen, or I want to film on an LED wall, I have to have those visual effects assets. I've got to build the Millennium Falcon in pre-production
In advance.
so that I can put it on the LED wall and film it. So doing visual effects first, means that then the shoot becomes an execution of those visual effects. And there's a huge amount of craft benefits to doing that, because you can sign off on things much earlier and you get a much better idea of what the film is going to be like, or the TV show is going to be like, when you're looking through the lens.
And that means, a single photo plate behind talent, as a close up, that can be, that's a misconception, right? Because that's sort of in camera VFX.
It is, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. It doesn't need to be super complex, right?
No,
it can be
it doesn't.
really, really easy.
And the camera doesn't have to move either. Lots of shots don't have a moving camera. And then, and if you think about car process work, which is, a huge part of which, Hitchcock with Psycho is an example of, but of course is a huge part of narrative production. Lots of drama takes place in vehicles and cars, and it's very inconvenient to film that while you're actually driving along, and it's really convenient to do it in a studio. That has been around, and we don't need Unreal to drive those plates, because it doesn't have to be 3D. If you don't move the camera too much, then you can get all of the reflections of the lighting and the reflections in the windshield and those tunnels, you fly through the tunnels, all that stuff. You can get all of that in a studio with dynamic lighting or LED panels to create those lighting effects.
Cool. Well, we're going to go to a break now. And when we come back, we're going to talk about Unreal Engine a bit more. So
Great.
After a break. See you in a minute.
Thanks.
In a minute.
Right. This episode is brought to you by Morden Wolf. Not sure where to start? How big a stage do you actually need? What about driving plates? Do you even need them? Is Unreal Engine necessary? Wait, what is Unreal Engine? You're thinking about virtual location scouting, but should you? How much is this all going to cost? And the big one, am I about to wreck my career by going the virtual production route? Yeah, there's lots of questions, and guessing your way through virtual production isn't the answer. That's where Morden Wolf comes in. We're an independent virtual production supervision studio, here to guide you from cradle to grave, whether you're just dipping your toes into VP or knee-deep in LED walls and camera tracking. We make sure you get exactly what you need. No overspending, no mishaps, just the right solution for your production. So if you need someone in your corner, choose Morden Wolf. Visit mordenwolf.com to find out more. Morden Wolf, why film it any other way? We talked in the background in the first bit about your background, and then you touched upon Unreal Engine. So we met 4 or 5 years ago now, I think, and I didn't know anything right to do with virtual production, and there was this thing called Unreal Engine, and I was using a Moses system, and I was using something called a Starcracker Studio, which was complex enough, but then they had this thing called Unreal Engine, and I knew nothing about it. So give us a quick summary in layman's terms what Unreal Engine is.
Okay, so Unreal Engine is a game engine, a video game engine. What that means is it's a graphics system that people use to run video games. So the most well-known one, and I think it's probably the most popular video game of all time, is called Fortnite. So Fortnite is a game that is built in the Unreal Engine. Unreal comes with an application called the Unreal Editor that allows you to build games. So I can literally drag my character in. I can animate my characters. I can put them into a virtual environment. I can control them with a controller. So I can have cameras inside that are attached to them, so I can follow them in a third-person style game. It has tools for creating all of the logic of the game. So when person gets shot, person falls over, all that stuff. It has the ability to light the scene in a very authentic way, and the ability to create textures and materials of the world to make it feel like it's a photorealistic, real environment. So
and it doesn't need to
perfect,
be
right? For sorry, go on.
So I was going to say, it doesn't need to be photorealistic, right? I mean, it's obviously
No, it can be
getting so much
completely
better.
stylized.
Depends on
Absolutely,
the
yeah.
genre, right?
It absolutely
What's the
does.
story you're telling?
And it certainly doesn't have to be photorealistic. I think the reason that people like Unreal Engine in our industry is because it's probably the most photorealistic of the game engines. But you absolutely can stylize it all, and it doesn't have to be a photoreal environment at all. If you think about it, we come back to the idea of real-time visual effects, then it becomes clear why we use game engines to do virtual production. Because a game engine is completely built, it's completely designed to be a real-time graphics engine. Because I have to drive my character around, zoom around the environment. It's all got to be very, very fast and low latency so that I can get that experience, that feeling of being inside a game world. It's the same reason that we use game engines to do VR headset applications, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we need that to be extremely fast, responsive, and to react to where we're looking. Now, if I replace the game controller with the position of the real camera, then I can render the scene, and render just means to like take that 3D world and turn it into a 2D image, basically. Can render the scene from that particular position where the real camera is, and that means I can overlay the real world with the virtual world, and they can line up perfectly. And as I move the camera, the rendering of the virtual world changes to match where the person is in the real world, where the camera is in the real world. The result of which is if I move the camera around the studio or the stage, then the characters appear to be locked in that virtual world. So if I'm filming them against a pure green screen environment, I can take that person and drop them into a virtual world. And as I move the camera around them, the background will render perfectly and it will look like they're locked in place. The reverse is also true. I worked on a show called Dance Monsters, which is definitely the most complicated technical show that I've ever worked on. It was 8 motion captured monsters, furry monsters, like kind of Monsters Inc. style monsters, dancing live in a stage filmed by 6 cameras, all tracked. Very complicated show, but that was AR. So that was taking virtual objects and putting them into a real world. But that is also virtual production. That is also a real-time visual effect.
Am I right in saying that AR stands for augmented reality?
Correct. Yeah, exactly. And it's augmented reality because we're taking the real, in that case, the real stage, it had a whole proscenium arch and all that stuff, big theatrical event, and we're augmenting that with a digital monster.
Like in Strictly Come Dancing, where fake elephants walk across the screen in front of the real
I actually
dancers.
did that one as well.
I thought you did.
That was me. Yeah, that's the elephant in the room. We call that one. Yeah,
the elephant in the room. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's AR, and that's still virtual production, right? Because
absolutely it is.
It's production, but there's an element, and it's real-time visual effects.
And the key for the uncanny valley is the fact that they're completely locked in place. Right, and they look as if they're absolutely walking along the floor, and they don't look like they're slipper sliding or they're suddenly hovering.
That's why you need really good camera tracking, which brings it back to why you've got to have that really good camera tracking. You've got to have really good compositing as well. You've got to really have nailed the lens as well, because it's not just where the camera is, but the lens is also very, what zoom you're on the lens and what distortions that lens has, because all lens, fisheye, they get all kind of really distorted, those lenses. So every lens has some distortion, and so even the lens we're looking through now has distortion at the edges. We've got to match all of that in order that we can lock the real world with the virtual world. And that's what I started to work on. It's probably around 10 years ago within Unreal Engine, so that people could do that inside Unreal. And I think we were the first people to do that in the native Unreal Engine.
Right. It would take us a little bit through that, Jim, because that's what I find really, really interesting, is that you've sort of gone on this journey of actually writing and creating a plugin, an enterprise-sized plugin for Unreal Engine, right? So take us a little bit through about, how did you suddenly, was it a whiteboard? Did you do that?
I wish it was that well organized.
Also, what is that plugin and what's it for? Like just take me back a step, because Rob knows about the plugin, but I'm kind of here.
Yeah,
fresh.
sure. Well, we call it VP Pro. Calling it a plugin makes it sound a little bit like an air freshener, I always find. It's actually a very sophisticated bit of software, but what it does is it kind of molds the Unreal Engine editor into a tool for virtual production. So the editor itself is designed for building video games, which is really good for designing your environments for virtual production, but it's not so good for operating the virtual production stage or being on set with a green screen or whatever and operating it. So what VP Pro does is it tries to make that all easier, and it automates lots of things inside the editor. We also have a lot of kind of custom features that make it easier. We can connect to lots of different bits of hardware on the set. So we can connect to the camera, pull its metadata. We can listen to when the camera goes into record, and we can roll record on the tracking data. We can do things for workflow for traditional visual effects, as well as for what we call near-time rendering, which is kind of an in-between between a virtual production and traditional visual effects, which if we have time we can come back to maybe. But yeah, so it's really a chain of tools for all the different types of virtual production, and it has a mode for each type. So there's AR mode, there's like a chroma key mode, there is XR mode, which is where you're doing an LED volume, but you're doing set extensions, they're called, so which is where you go beyond the edge of the LED wall with CG. So it means you can have a smaller wall and create bigger environments. And so we have all of these different modes and these different panels which come up inside Unreal to kind of make it feel less like a game editor and more like a virtual production toolkit.
That's really exciting. When did you start working on that?
So yeah, we started, as I say, it was probably nearly 10 years ago. It was something like Unreal 4.17 or something. I think it was a very long time ago in the Unreal cycle.
What are we on now?
And 5.3 we're on right now. Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, it was a while ago. Epic actually came to see us, including their technical director, their CTO, Kim, came to see us around about 7 or 8 years ago, I think it was, to see some of what we were doing with our tracking system inside Unreal natively. And bless him, the first thing he did was he came up to the camera and just moved it very quickly to see how well it was locked. And sure, and then he sort of nodded and was like, yep, okay, that's really well locked, because we knew we had to fix, get that right first. And then, beyond that, we've really gone, we've leveraged all of the developments that Unreal have made, so that Epic have made, Epic Games that make the Unreal Engine. So Epic are continuing to innovate both in virtual production, but also in general in the game engine. So our architecture allows us to take immediate advantage of all of the great stuff that Epic do. So we work very closely with them on that, and we try and use all the latest features and, roll them into our tools so that people can access them easier inside that operator environment.
And in that operator environment, does that work just with the MOSIS tracking system, or does it work with other tracking systems as well?
It can work with other tracking systems. It's sort of, at that point, we sort of can't guarantee it's going to work. But it can work with other tracking systems. Personally, I'm all about interoperability, really. One of the big problems with virtual production is that it's a cocktail of technologies, and A doesn't plug into B, and it only plugs into C, but B doesn't plug into C. So then you're getting all of this mess. And I'm actually part of a committee that's at SMPTE that are trying to change that. And we're very close, actually. We're days away, I think, from releasing at the first step, or the first two steps, really, in that interoperability chain, which is something that we're calling Open Track IO.
That's brilliant.
Open Lens IO is the lens mathematics behind it. And the idea is so that absolutely people can plug more things into more things, and I think that helps everybody. There's no sort of commercial value in a protocol. It's just, at the moment, we have 15 of them. Let's just have one.
Well, it allows you to grow the pie, right? It allows you to grow the ecosystem rather than everyone trying to have their own proprietary stuff.
And as a teacher,
but of course, what happened? Oh, sorry.
No, I was going to say, as a teacher, I work at head of screen and audio and digital at Lambda, and kind of, it's important that you introduce students to kind of different operating systems, and you say, okay, you've learned it on this, but you might be able to do it on this, and you know the theories behind it, but you don't know the detail, and I think that's okay. But also, if we can work in a world where some of that detail, talks to each other, then people can move faster and they're more useful across different environments and different sets.
Absolutely, and I have no problem throwing away code. In fact, I wrote an early version of one of the video drivers inside Unreal before Unreal had written one, and then they wrote it, and I had to throw all that code away. But that's fine. And the same will be true for our proprietary protocols now. The thing is, virtual production can be a little bit of a wild west, and in those environments where there are no sort of no standards or anything, people inevitably invent their own, and they come up with good practice engineering solutions. So a lot of them are actually really similar, but they're just a little bit different, and that little bit is the difference between it working and it not working. So all we've done is really kind of try to consolidate that and say, look, this is what you need to send. And for most of the manufacturers, it will hopefully be quite trivial for them to implement that, because Epic have also said they're going to implement it as well. So that should really encourage adoption, I hope.
Mm-hmm.
What about, to give us a bit of an understanding of how bigger or smaller engineering feat it was for you to do this plugin that we don't like to call a plugin?
Yeah, I mean, it is a big piece of software. I don't know what it is in sort of engineering years or weeks or whatever, but we've been working on it with a team of multiple developers. That team has grown up to, as I say, about 15 of us now that are working on pretty much purely that, and some surrounding tools as well. I mentioned about near time. We have some web services and stuff that also help the process. So we have a library of lens files. I mentioned about lenses being one of the key things. We have a library of those that we maintain. And this rendering system as well, this near-time rendering system. So there's kind of a growing load of more software tools and services that come out of it. If you like, the tracking is the core, and then with Star Trek and Max at the middle, and then there's kind of these software layers that make it more and more usable and user-friendly for people. It started off as just that one thing of being able to take a person and put them in an Unreal environment and move the camera around them. That's how it started, but now it's a lot more than that.
So we're just going to go to a break and see you in a bit.
See you in a bit.
Oh, hello. It's a bit quiet in here without an ad, but it doesn't have to be. Maybe you want to reach filmmakers, producers and creatives who are all about the latest innovations in film, TV, advertising, corporate content or social media. Got a game-changing tool that saves time and money? A virtual production studio that no one's heard of? But hey, you've got free snacks. Or maybe you just want to remind everyone that you're the best brand out there. Well, this silence, it could be yours. Get in touch at startingpixel.com and let's fill this space with something a little bit more exciting. The Starting Pixel podcast. Why film it any other way?
Welcome back, everyone.
Hello. Hi, James.
Hello. Right. So so before we were just talking about Unreal Engine and your development. So we're going to talk about sort of why we should care now. And you mentioned you got a couple of images you're going to share, and then maybe you can talk through that and really why, as media entertainment people, why you should care about Unreal Engine virtual production.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, I mean, this example I'm going to show here is a really good example of that, because it's this particular episode of Doctor Who, when the script was reviewed, because of the nature of the story, there was just so many visual effects shots, right? Just so many visual effects shots that the visual effects team had to think differently, and they needed to come up with a way of filming long sequences with multiple shots and in this environment. And let me, if I just show you the final, perhaps that makes a bit more sense. So that is the final shot. And if you saw this episode, a lot of the of the story takes place in this very long spaceship, and in fact, there's no way it can be shortened because it's critical to the story that this spaceship is really
Very
long.
long.
Yeah. So as I said, the visual effects company, a company called Real Time Visual Effects, who we work very closely with, wanted to use Unreal as the final graphics. And they wanted to use virtual production to do that. So if I go back to the first slide here, this is what it was like on the actual stage. I am just, in fact, that's my coat on the far left-hand side there. So
can you, just before you maybe just quickly, do you know what their decision-making process was to say we want to use Unreal Engine for final?
I don't know what their decision-making process was. We were involved in tests before this. They did test LED as an option. The problem is that if you've seen the episode, there's quite a lot of these big sweeping shots around where we sweep all around them. I mean, it would need a really, really big LED wall.
Massively.
So I'm guessing that was cost prohibitive. And then, we had worked on another project with this visual effects company, so that's why they kind of thought of us, I think. And I think it's kind of budgetary constraint, really. I think that's it. If you want to tell a story that's got 600 odd visual effects shots in it, then you need to think differently, and that's what they did.
Right.
I can't really speak to it any more than that, I suppose.
No. And when about was this? Is just put it into a time
so
frame?
this was this aired not last Christmas, but the Christmas before. So Christmas 2023. And it was filmed late 22, I believe, and it was I think it was filmed late 22. So, and this is using VP Pro, Star Tracker Max, in order to generate, and just off this image here, there is a cart basically which has all of our computers that render the background. On the top of the camera, there is a tracking device which is looking up at the ceiling. In fact, you can see on the silk here, perhaps maybe you can see that there's these markers, though, these little, we call them stars, which are little stickers that you put on the ceiling, and that's how the tracking system knows very precisely where it is. It's sort of like navigators of old, really, navigating using the stars is the idea. So then what that allows us to do is give the DP, director, actors, give everybody on set this preview. Now, you can see it's quite different in color, actually, to the final. There's a boom, but this little bit of green screen at the back that if we flip between the two, you'll see it's a slightly different colored green, so it hasn't really keyed quite as well.
It's just a cruder. It's a cruder outline, isn't it?
Exactly. That's exactly what it is. But crucially, it does really give you a sense of the environment that they're in, the lighting that's going to be required on them to sell it. You can see the we've masked off the left-hand side. We call that garbage matting. We can just get rid of that because we know that there's no green screen there, but we can just map that out, garbage that out. But critically, the geometry, as in the perspective that we were talking about, that perspective in the road that we were talking about, is spot on. So the continuation of the bridge, of the platform, if you like, is spot on. And that's true as the camera flies around. So the camera can move all around here, and we get a really locked version of the final scene. Then what we do is we can just re-render that background. Now, this is not graded, colored, or anything like that, and some of the color is blown out because of the nature of it, so you have to ignore the color. But again, the geometry is now spot on. Now, this is pure CG. So this is the whole background re-rendered. We can take that background, re-render it. We can now, still using Unreal, but we can render without having to worry about real time so much. So we can render it higher quality, higher resolution. We can turn up all the dials without having to sort of sacrifice the frame rate, the fact that it might go a bit jittery if we did that. And we can take that, and then we can give this to finishing department after they've done an edit, give it to the finishing department, and they will take this and overlay it over the top of this, right? And then they will tweak it all, grade it all, and make it look like that. But crucially, they haven't had to do any traditional visual effects.
So
In fact, they've automated. We can near time automates the generation of this one. So we can automatically create this from this. And it's much higher quality. And then the finishing process is a 2D finishing process. It's grading, blurring, that kind of stuff.
So tell me how you automatically generate one from another.
So you do that by recording the camera movements.
Right.
So let's say in this shot, the camera is sweeping around them like that. If I record the animation of that camera, and I know it because I've had to know it in order to create the previous, I'm getting it from the tracking system. So I know where the camera is. I know all about the lens. If I record all that information for every single frame, then I have a way of locking that to the picture as well, which VP Pro handles all of this for you, of course. Then I can take that, re-render just the bit I need, the bit of that shot that was edited down. I can re-render that in Unreal automatically in our near-time system.
So, for very simplistically, it's a bit like a super accurate GPS system for a camera. Would that be right?
Yeah,
but
that's
sort
right.
of three-dimensional. So rather than it being
absolutely
just a car going, well, look, you can do this and that.
Exactly. And
Right.
We're talking about super accurate. It's like 1 millimeter and 100th of a degree. So it's really, really accurate. And it has to be, because if it's not, then as that camera moves around, the doctor is going to slide against the background, you know, and the illusion is going to be broken.
So that moves us quite interestingly onto why anyone should care. You sort of, I guess, alluded to one part, which was where you can film the unfilmable, because that particular shot was, you couldn't build a set that big because budgets, even though Doctor Who probably has one of the biggest budgets for VFX in any television ever, kind of thing, but still they couldn't build something like that. So you sort of alluded to that, but that's I guess that's a creative decision as well, right? So otherwise you'd just wouldn't have been able to have the tunnel, right? So
or we wouldn't be able to tell the story even.
Or tell the story.
Yeah.
So what other reasons, I guess, should people care? What are the main drivers for that? There's creativity, but...
So I think I would maybe just extend creativity to creative freedom. So if you were going to take that shot, you could take that shot, but you wouldn't be able to move the camera very much, because you'd probably do it with a matte painting, right? You know, you'd build some of the set and then you'd extend the rest of the set by creating a big matte painting. That would be the kind of traditional special effects in camera way of doing it, 40 years ago or whatever. So, but you wouldn't be able to create that wonderful kind of storytelling moment of which happens in this episode, where the tunnel transforms and it goes dug, 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 and do this big sweeping shot around the Doctor as he follows it happening. So it's not just about the creative freedom in the storytelling. I suppose it's also about the wow factor, if you like, in the actual visual experience, I suppose. So there's those two things. There is also, with virtual production, I mean, in this case, obviously it was a green screen and there was a real floor. And that's quite often the case in virtual production, both with LED and with green screen, to use a real floor. It's quite common, or have some kind of real set components and then extend it with an LED or with a green screen. And in that situation, you can really, by just changing the smallest amount of set, you can change locations very, very conveniently. And so the reason that producers, I suppose, like virtual production is that one of the big expenses of production is moving big crews and cast and crews around. Here, you can bring the location to them. So that is kind of one of the big benefits, really. So it's not just about, I can now film in a spaceship in space or on the planet Tatooine or whatever, without having to, it's actually, I don't have to go to a desert and fake that. I can fake it in the computer instead.
So, and I guess through the perspective of Unreal, maybe why would you use Unreal compared to anything else? I think you've sort of said it as well. But I guess I'm trying to work out, if I was a producer and thinking about, I've heard this term virtual production and this term Unreal Engine. Why would I do that? Because you mentioned something about, this is a really interesting thing actually, about the creative. Surely a creative needs to understand sort of what the art of the possible is as well with Unreal and what can happen, right? So how sort of
Definitely, yeah.
how do they sort of, where does that penny drop?
So I think it really depends on the production. At the moment, I think that is coming from a lot of it is coming from visual effects as a way of solving storytelling problems, and there is very much a move, I would say, towards doing a combination of different virtual production techniques. It's not like you film the whole movie on an LED volume. It's actually what is right for this particular sequence, or even down to this particular shot. What is the best virtual production technique? One of the big things that we're working on at the moment is trying to make it easy for people to switch between techniques. So you can flip from AR into XR into LED in-camera visual effects without having, because the technology stack is primarily the same. You need camera tracking, you need rendering, you need them to be connected together, and so we just need the software to be able to kind of easily transition between them. And then all of a sudden it becomes, well, I can now take this entire portion of my schedule that I was going to have to fly people all around the world to solve, and I can solve it, but I can do it in a way that the craft practitioners are going to actually get the best storytelling out on the day. The best thing about virtual production, frankly, is that the director can leave the set knowing that they got it. It's so hard to do that if you're just working in a green box. You just don't know. Did we actually shoot that scene? Have we actually got all of it? And it's very much the director and the AD's responsibility to sort of nail that, and to be able to say confidently to the rest of the production that, that sequence we got it. Having a really high quality previs opens up all these opportunities for streamlining your visual effects process.
At the moment, where do you feel like there is the biggest kind of gap in knowledge? Do you think it's with writers? Do you think, because I think the thing is, a writer can write something and then it's up to a producer to say, this is how we're going to shoot it, right? But do you feel like the biggest gap in knowledge is with DPs, with producers, with directors? Where do you feel people are kind of leaning into you and going, no, I don't know how this works?
I mean, I think it's sort of across the board. There's a learning curve for everybody, to be honest. I think it's probably, it goes all the way back to the writing and figuring out what's possible, so that you're not presenting work that is just unachievable in the sort of budget scales that you have in mind for that. And I run quite a lot of training as part of my job, really, and that's often it's hands-on nuts and bolts training of like, how do you set up a tracking system, but actually more and more it's more general, and it's about techniques and what the implications are going to be for choosing a particular virtual production technique for a particular type of shot, breaking down scripts and figuring out, these sequences are not going to work on a green screen very well because I know we've got a chandelier in the story, and chandeliers are not good in green screen environments because they're just going to send, it's just going to come up green
everywhere.
Yeah. I mean, the Stormtrooper is the perfect example, right? It's the Mandalorian, the white plastic reflective
reflections in the mask.
It's the worst thing to put in a green. A Stormtrooper is kind of one of the worst things you could put in a green box. But it's brilliant in an LED environment, because what would be green spill becomes dynamic lighting spill. It's actually hitting the Stormtrooper with the correct lighting. And if a ship explodes over there, we'll see that reflected automatically in their outfit. All of that has to be recreated if you're doing it in traditional visual effects.
Visual effects.
Yeah, or even in green screen, simulcam. So there's a right technique, and I think that's probably the big learning curve at the moment for productions, is figuring out that everybody kind of wants to dabble with this and wants to give it a try and sees the value. We talked about commercial value and creative value. There's also carbon value, which is a really important thing as well. Flying crews around is extremely carbon costly. So there's environmental benefits to working in this way as well, not to mention the fact you don't need as much physical sets, and so there's not as much waste. Everybody sort of can see the value. They've just got to figure out how to apply the technique to their particular stories, and that's where I've been trying to help people. And I suppose I wouldn't say there's one particular thing that people come to me and ask. It's that general thing. How do I figure out, how can I make this technology work for me?
Yeah. It feels like there's a shift even in the last couple of years. I know that when we did the Simpty Cup conference a couple of years ago, we were talking on the panel, and there's I would say that kind of traditionally people who work in VFX, they get the finished product and they're used to kind of working with a sense of autonomy. And actually, there's a completely different shape to the production chain when those people come into pre. When those people who traditionally are used to working on their own come into pre-production, then actually it's a collaborative venture, and there's a real shift. And when we worked on the SIMPTE conference, we were working with Framestore, and it's that thing of going, okay, I'm used to, they were absolutely brilliant. The stuff they designed for us was extraordinary. The detail, we were shooting in the desert, and the detail of the chickens walking across the space, it was really extraordinary. But there's also that thing of going, some people are used to working on their own after the event. And I'm going, as a director, I'm going, no, but I need it to work like this. Do you know what I mean? Because actually this is the shot we want. It's a real, I do feel like there's a shift now. Like there's been a shift in the last couple of years where people are kind of communicating more effectively. I don't know. Would you agree?
I would agree with that. Absolutely. Yeah. People are taking virtual production much more seriously.
Mm.
The first feature I worked on as a virtual production, we were, I won't mention any names, but we were we were very much a small part of a small department, being visual effects. So VP was a small part of a visual effects department, which was a very small part of what was happening on the stage. And basically, and I'm sure this will be familiar to some people watching, listening, that the VFX supervisor, if VFX are not being treated, as sort of core to the storytelling, they'll just be, is that green screen okay?
Yeah.
Can you cope with that? Can you fix that later?
Mm-hmm.
Rather than being actually in that creative discussion about what can we do?
What can we do to make the story better?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's a really nice shift. Just kind of echoing what you're saying, but I think I definitely recognize that change. From being a small part of a small department to being, actually on the front line of the creative process. Not me personally, I'm very much at least now on the technical end of that. But the visual effects supervisor is now contributing, I think, is able to contribute more earlier, and it's a really good thing for the storytelling.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Thank you so much, James. That was incredibly insightful, and I'm sure we'll get you back on to talk about some other stuff in the future.
Bye.